We are now, we are now on to part two of our awesome, fantastic discussion with Alison Heape about the state of Christian education in America. Thank you all. If you have found this video, that means you have found our YouTube page. So make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as turn that post notification on. So Alison, what we were talking about right as and when our first segment ended was sort of aids for parents, helps for parents. I want to sort of dive off that, and maybe this is the reformed thinker in me. Just do you see in the past Christians and like the 1800s, 1600s, and prior, Christians have really fallen back on things like catechisms and creeds to teach the next generation the truths of the faith. I think of Charles Spurgeon when he at the remarks when they opened their orphanage associated with the church. He talked about how, if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, we must teach our children the fear of the Lord. And in 2021, there's so much has changed, obviously, since then, but so much in learning has changed since then. Is there still a place, do you think, for resources like that, or like memorization work, or do you think there's different programs that maybe could be taken more of advantage of? I'll let you go from there. You can.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. I would say there absolutely is a place for memorization in education, and I think that we should never stray away from having memorization be a significant part of education. I did a lot of memory in my education. I memorized a lot of verses. I memorized the Gettysburg Address. I probably couldn't recite it to you now because it's been a while, but all of those those type of things that traditionally have been memorized. Because I used a very traditional curriculum, I learned them, I memorized them, and they stick with me now mostly. And I think you're absolutely right that moving away from sort of this catechism, this memorizing of bodies of text, whether it be the Bible or just doctrines, definitely has sort of watered down our understanding of the Bible. And I think I don't know that there's causation here, but there's definitely correlation between that decline in the church and in Christian education and sort of just a more general movement away from memorization in education in general. A lot of teachers now, even in secular education, don't have students memorize things. They don't require that kind of work anymore. And everything now is, let's do this critical thinking. It's sort of this ambiguous term, critical thinking. Let's think critically about this. That's all I've heard for the past 3 years in the public school system is critical thinking, critical thinking. And I don't know what that means. I still don't. I'm a little embarrassed to say, what does that mean? Because I just don't understand how you can think critically about something if you don't know it really well. You can't explain the causes of World War II if you don't, or you can't. So a critical thinking task might be, write a story in which you are a young child living during the beginning of World War II and sort of craft your narrative to explain the causes of what brought about World War II. Well, you can't write that story if you don't have the causes of World War II memorized. You can't, those kind of tasks require some kind of knowledge. And so to apply the Bible to our daily lives, you have to know it. You have to have it committed to memory, to your heart. And I absolutely agree with you that, yes, that needs to be part of Christian education, is memorizing those Bible verses, memorizing those doctrinal statements.
That's really good. I think it even goes beyond that. I honestly, there's a lot of schools, a lot of districts around York. They've implemented this like iPad almost centric learning style, and it kind of bothers me when I hear it, because I mean, I was almost a part of that, I guess, you don't want to call it generation, but a part of that group of students where it was so kind of centralized around this online, every tool you had like spell check or whatever. There's a lot of kids that come out of high school or even middle school, they don't know how to spell. They really kind of have lost like the basics, because I mean, basically anything does it for them. You know, why spend so much time memorizing something if you can fall back on Google all the time and just, you know, like 3 clicks and you're done, and you know, like, oh, you know who shot who during what battle of, I don't know, you know, it doesn't matter. But it's just like, it's so easy to obtain information that that's kind of been put to the wayside. Is there anything else in particular that you would say would kind of bring back this type of more bare bone, bare, like basic learning style? Like maybe schools don't allow you to access a computer. You know, maybe we can go back to something as simple as that, where we have to actually teach cursive and handwriting and spelling, and we have to go through like phonics and everything, and just like kind of grasp these like basic necessities of education, and from there move on to like a memorization, and from there we can, you know, and once we have those things, we could use Google as a tool, but not kind of center our learning style around that. Do you think that would be like a plausible way we could go about things, or do you think that's probably not going to be something that happens?
I don't know if I see that happening in secular education in general, but I definitely see that happening in a lot of private schools and definitely in Christian schools. I've read a lot of articles from some teachers lately that are really trying to push back against this, what they call it, discovery learning, or project-based learning, where students are given a task and they learn information by doing the task. For example, like I said, the essay, World War II, instead of you write this essay after you've had direct instruction teaching you about the causes and the events of World War II, you get this essay prompt and then you do the research, which sometimes that's a great way to get a kid to really take ownership of their learning. But if that's all they ever do, if all they ever do is teach themselves, they're not going to get a really robust understanding of the most important parts of history, because they're only going to get what they find on the internet. And I really think that information has to be passed down very specifically, very intentionally from one generation to another, so that nothing is lost and so that the most important things are prioritized. And definitely I'm seeing some teachers try to return to that direct instructional model. That doesn't mean it's boring. That doesn't mean the teacher gets up and drones on for an hour. You can make direct instruction very interesting, but definitely putting the teacher at the center of the educational model and not the student, where the teacher's directing the learning and not the student directing their own learning and deciding what they're going to learn, is, I think, the better way to make sure that a child really learns what they need to know.
Absolutely, and the just some of the thoughts that I don't know, maybe it's uh, from the political spectrum of this next generation mentality, or the, you know, the child learns mentality, or what the child wants to learn mentality, not only in the educational system but also in, you know, think of the transgender issue, where the 5-year-old can choose, you know, what gender they are, things like that. And this is where Jason always gets the noose out on the podcast, because I drop a controversial statement. But it reminds me very much, and if you've done any reading on Nazi Germany and what that was their belief, you know, they wanted to create the super race. They wanted to create a not only a pure line, but they believed then that the next generation was going to be more intelligent, more powerful. And I just see that I see that in a lot of a lot of things in American culture. But Jason can get the noose on that. That was more of a statement than a question. So another thing, circling back to one of our earlier conversations, with everything going on, you mentioned the new administration. Can you sort of, I admittedly, as soon as Biden took the oath of office, I turned the TV off. I didn't really, haven't really paid attention too much, other than he's just signing America's soul away at this point with executive orders. But can you tell us a little bit about who he's put in charge of the educational system, who is sort of manning the ship on the federal level?
Sure. So right now, the Department of Education doesn't really have anyone at the helm. The nominee, Dr. Miguel Cardona, who is the former commissioner of Connecticut schools, is yet to be confirmed, but he had his Senate hearing this week. And he, in some ways, is sort of an unknown quantity because he's hard to get anything out of as far as what he's planning to do. And he hasn't made a lot of strong public statements in the past. I am very thankful that he, meaning President Biden, did not choose Randy Weingarten or Lily Escalson Garcia, which was two of his other top picks. They are current and former heads of the two largest teachers unions in the United States. And I really feel like that's a conflict of interest. So I'm really thankful that he chose someone who is in public education and not someone who is working in an organization that profits off of public education. So Dr. Cardona hasn't really spoken to his opinions on school choice or, the kind of policies that would give a little more freedom and leeway to Christian schools and to homeschoolers. But he did speak up this week a little bit on one of Biden's executive orders, which ties into what you were mentioning earlier. So Biden's executive order on civil rights protections based on gender identity and sexual orientation came up in Cardona's Senate hearing, and Senator Rand Paul asked Cardona whether he believes that biological males who identify as a transgender female, whether they should be allowed to participate in women's sports, which is what schools under his leadership in Connecticut have already been doing. And Dr. Cardona stated that it is the legal responsibility of schools to provide opportunities for students to participate in activities, and this includes students who are transgender. So definitely he's in some ways what you would expect, the kind of person you would expect Biden to pick, and he seems to be aligning with Biden's legislative agenda. But I don't think it's as dire as I thought it was going to be if he, like I said, had chosen one of the union heads to be at the helm of the Department of Education.
Wow, and that is once again finding optimism in what a lot of people have seen as the dark hour that it is. But that's interesting. So on the topic of transgenderism and Christian education in general, how do you see that playing out? Do you see that coming to a boil rapidly? Do you think it's just going to sort of be under the table for a while, or what do you expect to see from that, and what do you expect that the final outcomes will be? Good, bad, atrocious, sort of?
Well, so Dr. Cardona, well, let me back up. The executive orders requires all federal agencies to craft some sort of guidance on how they are going to, within their jurisdiction, protect LGBTQ rights. And those plans are due within 100 days. So if confirmed, Dr. Cardona will lead the Department of Education as they write this guidance. And we're not sure what actions this new administration might take to attempt or might take to try to enforce these protections in schools that are privately funded or that receive funds from the state. But definitely schools that receive federal funds will be affected by whatever guidance is released. There are some legal protections for Christian schools that do want to be faithful to the Bible's teachings on gender and sexuality. And currently, the Department of Education has regulations in place that's prior to Biden's inauguration that say that the enforcement of Title IX, which is civil rights protections, it's part of federal civil rights law that was passed as part of the Education Amendments of 1972, and it keeps schools from discriminating based on sex, and it also affects any other educational program that receives federal money. So that affects higher education as well. So currently, the Department of Education has these regulations in place that say that the enforcement of this Title IX should not trump an organization's religious freedoms under the Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment. But if those should be rescinded under Dr. Cardona, assuming that he is voted in, the Bostock ruling, which is a big Supreme Court case from this summer that sort of gave the foundation for this executive order that under Title VII, employers cannot discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So the Bostock ruling itself says that religious exemptions in Title VII should be upheld, and RFRA provides legal protections for the exercise of religion. So there are some structures in place to protect Christian schools that do want to be faithful to biblical teaching on gender and sexuality. And definitely, I think those will sort of be the finger in the dam, so to speak, that keeps all of that from I guess trickling down into Christian schools.
Yeah, well, certainly interesting times ahead for everything. Alison, I do want to first off thank you for being on with us today, and also just thank you for standing firm for biblical truths in the environment which you are, which is not going to be an easy thing in the near future. Just one final question for me, Jason. I'm sure you might have some more things to say, but just what are some ways just people can pray for this whole situation and Christian education in the future?
Definitely pray for teachers, because we are spending a lot of time with your children. I did the math today, and a child in K-12 education spends 14,000 hours in a classroom from kindergarten to 12th grade. So pray for God to give us wisdom as we interact with your child. If your child is in a school, definitely pray for Christian curriculum companies to be able to continue on operating and publishing textbooks, and pray that they would be biblically faithful and not bow down to this cancel culture, and that they would push back against the culture. And definitely pray that God would allow our political authorities to give Christian schools space to operate independently and not become sort of an extension of the state that just has Christian in the name. It's difficult there in some ways to there's sort of like a conundrum here for Christian schools as we see more and more school choice programs popping up. And there's currently 17 states that have school choice programs proposed in the state legislature. And I think those are great things. It gets more children in Christian schools. It gives families a chance to choose how their children are educated. But with every tax dollar that goes to a school, strings are attached. So these Christian schools are now facing this decision of, do we decide to participate in this program and potentially open ourselves up to more regulations that might restrict our ability to operate independently and be biblically faithful? Or do we choose not to participate and lose some potential students? So with every good thing, there's always it seems some sort of downside when it comes to legislation. But those are a few things that come to mind.
That's okay. I want to say I love your outlook on things as it stands right now, because I feel like, and me included in this, I've kind of noticed a lot of Christians and believers have fallen into this trap where everything does look really gloomy and there's not a lot of hope on the horizon. And it's important to pay attention to those positives and those things that we do have going for us, because even as you said, if the most of our persecution is schools get taxed, or you have to kind of weed out the Christian schools from the Christian schools, that's not like, it can get a lot worse than that. We need to be thankful for that. And as we go through all this, I think it's really cool to kind of keep that mindset, because it strengthens our resolve to stand for boldness in the truth and in the faith, which is something I always like to come back to, because it is, as things kind of get more strict for Christianity and Christians as a whole, it's important to stand for those principal biblical values that we hold dear to us. And as we do that and we go through this time as a church together, we do need to be in prayer for these things. And it is important to recognize that, because the fight is still at hand, and it's not too late. It's never too late, and it's never time to give up or time to throw in the towel. And Alison, I like that whole entire look at the positive side thing you got going on there. That's good.
Well, thank you. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's never too late. And we can go into these fights knowing that in the end, we might lose the battle, but we win the war, because Jesus promises in John 16:33 that, in this world, we're going to suffer persecution. But he says, take heart, I have overcome the world. So things might look bleak for us right now, but we know in the end that Jesus wins.
Amen. Amen to that. And on that note, we will bid you all adieu. Once again, Alison, thank you so much for joining us on this adventure, this two-part adventure. For all those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, this is the Christians in America podcast. God bless.
That was